Welcome in, everybody, to the Flagship podcast. Merry Christmas. I am Chip Brown of Horns 24/7, joined as always by our fearless leader, the managing editor of Horns 24/7, the one and only Taylor Estes. Taylor, Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas, Chip. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm doing
Yeah.
great. I've had an unbelievable, um, I was in Vegas over the weekend,
What happened
covering
in Vegas?
covering Texas basketball and got married.
Yay! I know.
It was
Spoiler alert,
amazing.
that's been behind the scenes here.
It was amazing. We
Your
actually
bride looked beautiful.
well, she's the best. I
Mhm.
mean, she puts up with me. So we helicoptered from Vegas into the Grand Canyon, got married. It was a beautiful, picture perfect Saturday. And and then we did our reception at Chris Angel, the mind freak
Mhm.
magician. We actually had tickets to that before we decided we were getting married that day. But it ended up being outrageously interesting. I found
Uh-huh.
out the men's basketball team was at David Copperfield that night.
Oh, okay.
Um, and then and then my bride and she went to the games, the Texas basketball games at T-Mobile, one of which almost didn't happen, and I covered the games. So it was a really eventful weekend. And oh, by the way, there was a ton going on with Texas football from Tashard Choice, who I covered when he was with the Dallas Cowboys as a running back, being named Stan Drayton's replacement as running backs coach, to us, reporting that Andre Coleman, the receivers coach, is out, and Steve Sarkisian is, looking for a new receivers coach, and Casey Thompson entered the transfer portal, and on Monday, um, wrote a long post on social media thanking Texas for his experience as a Longhorn. He graduated in 3 years, but that is significant, Taylor, because we know you have to have the quarterback situation right. And say what you want about um, whether Casey, his second half of the season, compared to his first half of the season, but the kid, led the Big 12 in passing touchdowns, and three different, set a school record, 3 games where he threw for 5 touchdowns, um, completed 63% of his passes. And, and this was his first year as a starter, and he had 2 years left of eligibility. So you would think the quarterback would develop. So you get a guy who, throws for 24 touchdowns and 9 interceptions in year 1, that he's got room to grow. And I think the just the lack of clarity about what the quarterback situation was going to be, obviously with Quinn Ewers coming in, I think Casey felt like, you know what, I don't know if I have anyone in my corner, and I don't
Yeah.
know that Steve Sarkisian's in my corner, and I'm going to go try and find a place where I feel like the coach is more in my corner. And look, who are we to say we were not in those quarterback meeting rooms all season? What
Right.
Steve Sarkisian and Casey Thompson were saying. Um, Obviously, uh, you hate to lose a guy who had a year in this offense, because this is not an easy offense to learn. It's voluminous. And we had multiple players tell us that. So, if you're a Texas fan, you're so excited about Quinn Ewers, the highest rated recruit since Vince Young. But he doesn't even have his playbook yet. He won't get it till he's enrolled, or not supposed to. And so, now you got Quinn Ewers, you got Hudson Card, who started the season, but Casey finished the season as the starter, and Charles Wright and Malik Murphy, who is hugely talented, big arm. but is still learning the quarterback position and has to learn this offense. So it's, your quarterback room isn't set up right anymore, right? You had a
Right.
veteran, you bring in a transfer who's, been at Ohio State, been in those meetings, and you got Hudson who's got some experience, and then you've got Malik who's a true freshman,
Right.
and it's set up pretty well. But now you're you don't have that veteran, quote unquote veteran who's got 10 games of starting experience. So it's exciting because Quinn Ewers is, one of the best quarterback recruits ever to sign at Texas. But what if he gets injured, or what if, it puts a lot on his shoulders too, Taylor. I mean,
Right.
we know this place can, amp guys up to where the expectations are almost unattainable. And this is a guy who's got all the recruiting hype and everything. But he's got to develop too.
He does, yeah, and Texas is, a tough place to come because I feel like every time, Chip and I were talking about this before we started recording, but I feel like, a lot of times when Texas signs big name guys or big recruiting classes, a lot of the expectations from Texas fans and Texas faithful is day one All-Americans. And you can't I mean, I go back to what my father-in-law always told me, that there are very few players that he ever saw in his 30 plus years coaching football that could ever go from, high school straight to the NFL. And the only player he ever would point to was Adrian Peterson, because he coached Adrian Peterson as well, when he was in East Texas there. So, I mean, yeah, the expectations are super high for Quinn Ewers. It is good that Texas at least still has Hudson Card. It's going to be, I think, a challenge at this point, Chip, and something that Steve Sarkisian is going to really have to work in overdrive a little bit to keep him on the roster, just because I think all of the hype is with Quinn Ewers. But at this point, Hudson's the only one that not only has collegiate starting experience, but he's the only one that has any knowledge of this playbook that Steve Sarkisian has. And you're right, there have been a lot of players that are on offense at Texas that talked openly about how, in depth and how detailed and how advanced, I think is probably the best word to say it, that the playbook is, especially for quarterbacks at Texas. So, this is it's a little surprising development for me. I think that I was expecting Casey to at least, the one thing that I know that I've seen people like kind of bash Casey on social media saying he's afraid to compete. Casey's only competed since he's been at Texas. I mean, think about it. Like, he, as you've always said, he's the guy that was never supposed to be the guy. And I hate that narrative. I do not think that this is something that you can say about Casey Thompson. I do think that there are probably some quarterbacks you could say that about at different schools when this, happens. But Casey has done nothing but compete, since he enrolled at Texas in 2018. So, but I did expect him to stick around and see how the spring competition played out, because I didn't expect him to enter the transfer portal. But this is a huge loss. And, I think a lot of people were critical on Casey Thompson's performance. I was one of them. I like, I'm sorry, but now that these players are getting paid, I think it gives you a lot more reason to be a little bit more critical on them. If we are doing our job bad and we're getting paid a salary, then, or, getting paid money, it, we deserve criticism, And so I think that, but, I think the thumb injury really was more significant and substantial than what was really alluded to. And that was probably done intentionally to keep it, under wraps a little bit, so that defenses weren't going after, his throwing hand or anything, or trying to take him out more. But I do think that, there was a lot of things that probably played into this situation happening now. And I will give Casey Thompson credit, though, for him waiting until after National Signing Day to enter the transfer portal. Because, I mean, this is not a decision you make overnight. And, in your reporting and you speaking with Charles Thompson, Casey Thompson's dad, in your report about Casey entering the transfer portal, it sounds like they've been having these conversations for a while. But there's no denying that this is a loss, a big loss for Texas. And it definitely does put a lot more pressure, I think, on Quinn Ewers at this point, or Hudson Card. But, this is not an ideal situation. And now I feel like this almost further magnifies the need for Texas to go after a transfer portal quarterback right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and it's interesting because there was some speculation, and we reported as Steve Sarkisian reiterated and confirmed on signing day when he said that he told Casey Thompson and Hudson Card there would be a minimum of 2 quarterbacks added to the quarterback room, most likely one from the portal, obviously the other being Malik Murphy, who'd been committed to Texas for a long time. But they had been talking or have been talking to other uh, quarterbacks who are either in the portal or are thinking about being in the portal. Um, one of whom was Miles Brennan, who has now decided he's going to stay at LSU. So I think it's tricky because if you're a veteran in the portal, who wants to come get behind the Quinn Ewers train?
Yeah.
Because they're learning the offense at the same rate, at the same time. They're learning it just like Hudson and Casey were learning it last year.
Hmm.
And unless there's a quarterback who's worked with Steve Sarkisian and knows, his offense, and there's not a quarterback at Alabama who fits this kind of mold or profile. So it's going to be interesting because what if and look, I know that at the end of the season there was frustration from Casey because you know they played both quarterbacks in the Kansas game. Casey got 2 series, Hudson got 3, and the third was a pick six that put them in a hole that Texas ended up getting out of, getting into overtime. It was a mess, Taylor. There
Yeah.
was little rhyme or reason from what I'm being told as to how that quarterback rotation was going. There just wasn't a lot of trust, I think, from really maybe both quarterbacks wondering, okay, is this a setup to attract a portal quarterback to make it look like we have no quarterback? We this job's totally open. There's no one here. There's no incumbent. And I think that was frustrating to Casey because, for Casey trying to play through the thumb injury, some games were better than others, obviously.
Hmm.
But there were games where receivers dropped passes like Baylor and West Virginia, and the offense couldn't get going. There were other games where West or Iowa State, his thumb, he couldn't throw the ball. He was bouncing. And so it was just a strange year at the quarterback position. And so here we are. It's
Yeah.
it's fascinating. And look, everything starts at the quarterback position for Texas, for any major program. You've got to have the quarterback position right, or um, you better have a defense that looks like the Ravens in 2000 or something. You got to have. I mean, some Alabama teams, some would argue the Alabama team that beat Texas for the national championship in '09 with Greg McElroy, that Greg McElroy wasn't anything special, but he had Trent Richardson, Mark Ingram at running back. He had
Yeah.
Julio Jones at receiver, and a massive offensive line. Look, you and I could have. No, I'm kidding. But look, it's a rebuild. It's a
Hmm.
rebuild, and Steve Sarkisian um, has told us that. I mean, he told us that again on signing day when now the number's 36 or 37 new players potentially, Taylor. So I just think Texas fans, everything, have to settle into the fact that this is a rebuild. Yeah, you're playing Alabama in week 2 and you're playing Jeff Traylor and his 12-1 UTSA Roadrunners in week 3, but you're starting from scratch.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, there's
it's
no doubt about it.
going to take
And
time.
I will say, I want to go back to one thing you said. If there was questions if they were doing this intentionally, make the quarterback look like they needed a quarterback. That sounds crazy to me. I mean, I maybe the players felt that way. I'm not sure. But at a place like Texas, Steve Sarkisian doesn't have time to like just have a throwaway year. I mean, let's be honest. This is a program that's on its fourth head coach since 2013. So, in a 7-year span, essentially, it's on his fourth head coach. That seems ludicrous to me. I can't imagine Steve Sarkisian just using that as like a, hey, maybe we need a quarterback here because it could cost him his job if he did something like that. So, and
Or
I know that
maybe
younger players may think that, younger people may think things like that. I get that, but that
or
sounds
maybe
ludicrous
they
to me.
thought they could beat Kansas no matter who was playing quarterback.
Maybe. Yeah, and they probably should have. I mean, let's be real about that. They probably should have. That was a terrible defensive performance by Texas against Kansas. It was very reminiscent of the last time they played, which was in 2019, since they didn't play each other in 2020 because of Kansas COVID issues. That was a terrible defensive performance that cost Todd Orlando his job. Honestly, I think that he was done at that point. But yeah, I mean, they should have beat Kansas. Let's be honest, but there's no denying, Chip, that this is a huge loss for Texas, and I'm curious where would they go in the transfer portal? If you were Steve Sarkisian right now, where do you go?
Right. I mean, who wants to come in to Quinn Ewers' shadow? I mean,
Yeah,
and that was going to be look, if Hudson Card beats out Quinn Ewers, there's a segment of the fan base that is going to be like, huh?
yeah, no, for
And
sure.
that's again, Quinn Ewers learning the offense for the first time. Hudson Card, you hope, continues to develop in this offense. I mean, look, Hudson Card completed over 60% of his passes, threw for 5 touchdowns with 1 interception. I mean, he didn't play terribly. Just the offense bogged down, and I mean, it bogged down at times under Casey. There were a lot of
Yeah,
3 and outs, um, and so you hope he's going to continue to develop, but there's going to be a part of the fan base that's going to be like, no, Quinn Ewers, and the minute Hudson Card struggles, they're going to be like, get Quinn Ewers in there.
yes, yeah,
It'll be reminiscent of but not even really. I mean, if Casey had stuck around, it would have been more reminiscent of the Major Applewhite, Chris Sims situation, because at least Casey would have, he threw for 5 touchdowns without an interception against OU. I mean, the guy, that was a signature game for Casey Thompson. He played great in that game.
yeah, and he
And
also had Xavier Worthy that played fantastic in that game too
well,
against OU.
yeah, I mean,
I mean,
Xavier
that first
fumbled
touch,
the kick
yeah,
return, but I mean,
but
there
still,
was
like his receiving,
no, I'm saying
job,
as a
yeah,
quarterback, Chris Sims never had a game like that. You know what I mean?
mhm,
You got to see how your quarterback is going to handle the biggest stage against your
mhm,
biggest rival, the rival who's kicking your butt 6 straight years, for the conference championship. Casey Thompson showed he can, deliver in that game,
for sure.
and and is an asset. I mean, I don't think anyone listening to us would argue that Casey Thompson's not an asset at quarterback. I mean, they can, you know, talk about the pick 6 against Oklahoma State. That they were still ahead. That was in the first half. They were still ahead by 11 in the third quarter.
Right.
Bottom line is, like you said, it's a huge loss. Now,
Mhm.
Steve Sarkisian's got to manage this thing just right. And I don't know. I don't know who would come in. I don't
Yeah,
know, because if you have 1 year left, what are you going to do? You wouldn't even tell Casey Thompson he was the incumbent, which could have taken some pressure off of Quinn Ewers all through the spring and all through fall camp. You could
right.
have said
Yeah,
Casey Thompson's our starter. You know, Quinn Ewers is getting better. He's progressing. And then if Quinn Ewers beats him out in fall camp, hey, Quinn Ewers has beaten out Casey Thompson, whatever. And so I don't know. How do you get a veteran in here now?
yeah. I mean, it's gonna be a tough job if it's even a feasible job, Chip, and I think the biggest thing that you mentioned there in talking about, with Quinn Ewers, when Texas signed him, everybody expects him to be the guy. But remember, this is supposed to be a kid that should be graduating high school right now and coming in as an early enrollee,
Right.
not a guy as a coming out of the transfer portal. And as a little sneak peek, we are going to have Steve Wiltfong on for our flagship interview on Monday. He even said something about it and said, I still consider Quinn Ewers part of the 2022 class, because that's what he was. He was part of that 2022 class before he reclassified and enrolled in August. And I would say the one thing I would say to any Texas fan that expects Quinn Ewers to be an All-American the minute that he throws his first pass at Texas is tap the brakes a little bit, because it actually will benefit Quinn Ewers for him to have a full year at a college program, the same college program. I mean, he's only been in college since the beginning of August, and he wasn't even supposed to be in college at the beginning of
Right.
August. He was supposed to be in college like in January of 2022. So, I think that you've got it that if you're a Texas fan, you've got to have some sort of patience right now when it comes to the quarterback position, because, you know, expecting Quinn Ewers to be, a Heisman favorite or something in year one, and then like saying he's going to be a bust or something if he throws a couple interceptions. I know how this works. We all know how this works, Texas fans. Like, let's be real. Like, Chip and I have covered this for so long. I know Texas fans have been around for decades. This is how it goes at Texas. If your first mistake, it's like, oh, he's a bust. It's like, let's just tap the brakes there. And maybe this will be a good situation if Hudson Card continues to develop. Hudson Card didn't have a true redshirt freshman season, really, with COVID and everything as an early enrollee. He didn't go through, he went through some winter conditioning, didn't go through spring practice, didn't have a normal summer off season. They had a shortened season and everything in 2022. So, I mean, this is a unique situation that Texas is in, but it's not going to be the end of the world if Hudson Card is named the starter, for week one. And it doesn't mean that Steve Sarkisian doesn't know what he's doing if he's named the starter in week one, too, because I think you got to see how this plays out. And the last thing that Texas needs is for Quinn Ewers to come in and kind of have a Garrett Gilbert-esque type of, entry at the college level. And that would be detrimental to the program. So I think that you got to tap the brakes on any thought that Quinn Ewers is going to be a Heisman candidate in year one. Maybe he will. If he is, then I will eat crow as long as for the rest of my career. I will eat crow, but expecting that at this point is way too soon.
Yeah. Yeah. And remember, Steve Sarkisian went with Mac Jones. Now, Mac Jones had shown on the field he could, handle some things when Tua, Tagovailoa was injured. But he kept Bryce Young on the bench last year when Alabama was winning the national championship. And Bryce Young is as close to Aaron Rodgers as I've seen in a college player. I mean, the guy is unbelievable. So, Steve Sarkisian has made big, bold decisions in the past, but that was at Alabama where they were rolling no matter what. And this is Texas coming off a 5-7 season. And he's got Steve Sarkisian's got a lot on his plate, because when you talk rebuild, you've got to reestablish your culture with a
Right.
whole new group of players. And they've got to, come together, bond, get to that point where they'll do anything for the guy next to them. And that takes time. So this is an exciting time. It was an unbelievable signing day. Quinn Ewers, big part of that, but the offensive and defensive linemen coming in give Texas fans hope, because that's where Texas has been lacking. Even when there were great offensive and defensive linemen in the state of Texas, Texas wasn't always in on those kids for whatever reason. Now they're bringing them in left and right in this class, and they need to stack classes like this in 23 and 24. But this is the kind of first step that this program has needed in a long time, and it's an exciting time.
Yeah.
Tashard Choice. I mean, this is a guy who took the USC job, Taylor, and then turned around and said, "Oh, Steve Sarkisian wants me. I'm going to Texas." And
Yeah.
Tashard Choice is a high energy guy. I covered him when he was a Dallas Cowboy, and had him on a radio show I used to do. And he is all energy, all the time, really high energy recruiter. And so I think that is an exciting hire. And now Steve Sarkisian's looking for a new receivers coach. And we reported on that situation that maybe Steve Sarkisian and Andre Coleman didn't see eye to eye in the recruiting process. That Steve Sarkisian wants F1 cars, and Andre Coleman kind of looks for those F-150 trucks, that are going to be hard, overachieving blue collar types. And Steve Sarkisian's like, no, I need Jalen Waddles. Okay. And so, and look, Texas had some decommitments: Evan Stewart, Armani Winfield, Faison Wilson. And so, Sark brought in Xavier Worthy. He wants more guys like that. And so now Texas looking for a new receivers coach, and a lot of focus on Brennan Marion, possibly from Pitt, who's already getting a reputation for his go-go offense. This is a fascinating possibility if it ends up being Brennan Marion, to have his, look, head coaches are always looking for new, fresh ideas. If you could get Brennan Marion as a receivers coach, because he's getting some talk about maybe being an offensive coordinator, that would be exciting. So it's a big time right now for Texas football.
Yeah, it is. And we've kind of hinted a little bit on the Flagship podcast over the last several weeks, Chip, about there's at least going to be one coaching change from what we were hearing through our sources. And this was the one, where Steve Sarkisian makes the change himself. And, Andre Coleman's a great guy. I always enjoyed talking to him, but there's no denying that aside from Xavier Worthy, the receivers haven't really developed very much in the last 2 years, really. I mean, he was upgraded from an analyst to Tom Herman's wide receivers coach heading into the 2020 season after Herman whiffed on some of the receivers coaches that he was trying to go after then. And I think that this is probably a needed change. I always hate saying that because I feel bad for these coaches. I mean, I know fans don't consider that, but these people have families and stuff, and they're, losing their job. I mean, that's never a good situation for anybody. But I think this was kind of a little bit of a slow moving train that we knew was going to eventually pick up steam and be the end result. And, and as Chip was the one who first reported this news and broke the story about Andre Coleman. So yeah, there's definitely a lot to watch, I think, there. And if they can get the Marion from Pittsburgh, that would be a pretty huge hire, I think. But you guys stay tuned. That's why you subscribe to Horns 24/7 as well, because we are usually in the know on these type of situations. And even though it's Christmas time, we're all working on overdrive to get the latest scoop on this. So you'll want to make sure to join Horns 24/7 if you are not a current member. If you want to sign up for an annual membership, we give 30% off your first year for new members, or your first month for $1. So definitely check that out, because there's more news coming, both from the coaching side and also the transfer portal side, because Texas recruiting is not done right now.
Yeah, no doubt about that. All right, well, we're going to change things up a little bit, right, Taylor?
We are, yes. So for a Christmas special, we're going to take a quick break, but we're going to have a different segment instead of, our fan favorite Love It or Leave It. And it's going to be a pretty fun one, I think, and more of a personal one. So you'll definitely want to stay tuned for that. But we are going to take a quick break. So stay tuned. We'll be right back. And if you're watching us on the Horns 24/7 YouTube channel, we will roll on to our new segment here for this week. And Chip, so to switch this up, Chip and I were kind of talking about, with it being Christmas time and everything, we're going to throw out some Christmas wishes for Texas fans for, this year and beyond. So Chip, I think let's start with you. What's your first Christmas wish for Texas fans?
Well, I think, I'll start off with a veteran quarterback in the transfer portal somehow, some way. Wish for Steve Sarkisian to bring in a veteran quarterback to help stabilize that quarterback room, because I think you've got some young guns in there, but you'd probably like to have a guy who's got some, big time experience And I think it's going to be tough, but uh, I'll wish that for Steve Sarkisian. Taylor, how about you?
All right. Well, my first one is for Texas fans to practice some patience over the next couple of years because I know there's a lot of hype right now with Texas and signing, the nation's number 5 signing class, which is awesome. I mean, especially coming off of a 5-7 season, Chip, let's be real. That doesn't happen very often. And so, but again, as we said before, I feel like Texas fans, when they sign these big classes or these big recruits, a lot of times it's the expectation is day one All-American or day one college football award winner or something like that. And it's just not, that's just setting yourself up for disappointment. So my first wish for Texas fans is to practice a little patience, because if you listen to our Mondays, this upcoming Monday's interview with Steve Wiltfong, you will hear how impressive, especially this offensive line and defensive line haul that Texas signed. So I listen to Fong all the time. When he says those things, you don't take it with a grain of salt. You take it as the gospel, and that's what I think you're going to be excited. If you're a Texas fan, you're going to be excited to hear that interview that we have coming up here next week. But that's my first one. Patience. Let these coaches develop these players, because I think that the future is bright if these guys get the proper development. What's your second?
Yeah, I'll piggyback on that and say, you know, it's a rebuild.
Mhm.
I mean, when Steve Sarkisian, with 2 weeks left in the season, he said we could potentially have 33 new players. And then on signing day, he said we could have 36 or 37 new players on our roster. It's a rebuild.
Yeah.
So just sort of calibrate your mind to that and get excited to watch these young players grow. I know the last thing you want to hear is, wait, we're not going to be in contention again? And no coach is ever going to temper that with his players, especially when you have a recruiting class full of guys like Jure Bledsoe and Kelvin Banks and Quinn Ewers. But remember, Mac Brown brought in maybe the best recruiting class of all time in 2002 with Vince Young, Casey Studdard, Lyle Senline, Justin Blaylock, Brian Robinson. The list goes on. Selvin Young. They didn't win the national championship until 2005.
Mm-hmm.
So it takes a little time, but if you've got really talented players like Xavier Worthy was fun to watch this year, get excited about watching, Jure Bledsoe, Jamon Tapp, Justice Finkley, Ethan Burke, all these guys, watch them grow and help them recruit the next round of top 5 recruits. And so just maybe be excited to watch really talented young players grow. Taylor?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, one thing I was gonna say, remember, Vince Young did not start
That's right.
in 2002 or 2003. He did in 2004, but still, that was, Quinn Ewers, the highest rated quarterback recruit coming out of high school since Vince Young. Just try to remember those early days, Texas fans here. But anyway, my second one is Texas baseball, collegiate baseball came out with its preseason rankings, and Texas baseball was ranked number 1 preseason. And so my wish for Texas fans is that Texas baseball lives up to the preseason hype and, maybe kind of erases a little bit of the sorrow from the football season by having a solid baseball season for Texas and for David Pierce. It was fun last year to watch them go to Omaha. Let's see them, make it further in the tournament.
Taylor, my last Christmas wish would be for all the kids in the transfer portal, whether they're leaving Texas or going somewhere else, to find a happy home, because these are student athletes who are trying to live out their dreams. Skylar Fields, that was a bit of a surprise going into the weekend, the All-American junior opposite hitter for Jared Elliott's volleyball team. And then I called around, and look, she wants to be the featured player, and she's on a team with Logan Eggleston and Molly Phillips. That's a team with 5 All-Americans, and Skylar Fields is talented enough to be the featured player on a team. And it's her dream to have that opportunity. And she's playing with Asia O'Neal as well. I guess there are times where you can have too much talent. And so you just hope the Casey Thompsons, the Skylar Fields, the Jared Wileys of the world find what they're looking for. And then, for the teams still playing in this 21-22 school year, there's a lot of excitement ahead. I mean, Texas men's and women's basketball are both capable of deep runs in March. I mean, you've got the women's tennis team is the defending national champion. They're loaded again this year. The men's tennis team. You mentioned, baseball. I mean, there's a lot of excitement, and so enjoy those teams too,
Yes.
because they're super talented. Go out, support them, watch them, and cheer them on, because there's some talent on the 40 acres.
Yeah. No, I that's a great one too. My final one, Chip, is that Texas. It's kind of similar to your first when you said quarterback. I think that my wish would be that Texas lands instant contributors from the transfer portal. Whether it's probably on the offensive line will be a key one. As you mentioned, the quarterback. I think that it would not hurt Texas to add some more bodies at wide receiver and some not just capable bodies, but some solid, potential playmakers. It's going to be interesting to watch that play out with there not being a receivers coach currently on staff, but they have some time to kind of add some more players there. Receiver usually is a skill position that players can play day one, even if they don't have too much experience. But to land some instant contributors from the transfer portal would be my final wish for Texas fans heading into the 2022 season.
Well, Taylor, Merry Christmas to you. Merry Christmas to all of our listeners. Thanks so much for taking some time this Christmas week to listen in, or whenever you're listening in. We always appreciate your tuning in to the Flagship podcast, and hope everyone has a great Christmas full of friends and family. And until next time, here on the Flagship podcast, for Taylor Estes, I am Chip Brown. Stay safe and keep the faith, and Merry Christmas.